Hello, my dear friends. Picture yourself standing on a stone-paved street, so high in the mountains that the air itself feels thin and sharp, tasting of cold rock and distant wood smoke. You are in the heart of the Inca Empire, a civilization of such breathtaking order and precision that it seems almost unreal. Every stone in the wall beside you is cut so perfectly it fits against its neighbor without a single smear of mortar, a seamless puzzle of granite. In the distance, terraced fields climb the impossible slopes of the Andes like green stairways to the heavens. It all feels perfect. Too perfect. A society built on a foundation of logic and harmony. But let's be honest, if you were dropped into this world with your modern sensibilities, you probably wouldn't survive the first week. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a quiet way of letting me know we're on the right path together. Find that perfect spot, let your head sink into your pillow, and imagine the chill of that high-altitude air on your skin. Imagine the silence, broken only by the distant bleating of a llama and the soft whisper of the wind. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The entire sprawling empire, stretching from modern-day Colombia down to Chile, was governed by a seemingly simple and elegant mantra. It was the state's official slogan, a phrase you would have heard whispered by officials, taught to children, and perhaps even carved into public buildings. Ama shua, ama lula, ama krilla. Don't steal. Don't lie. Don't be lazy. It sounds wonderfully straightforward, doesn't it? The kind of simple, virtuous foundation any society would be proud of. It's the glamorous illusion of the Inca world, a place of profound moral clarity, where everyone knew the rules and worked together for the common good under the benevolent gaze of the Sapa Inca, the divine emperor. You can almost picture the travel brochure, Visit the Inca Empire, where honesty and hard work are all that matter. It's a beautiful thought, and it's a complete fantasy. The shocking reality lies just beneath that polished stone surface. This was not a gentle suggestion. This was the ironclad law of a totalitarian state, and the interpretation of these three simple rules was absolute, far-reaching, and often fatal. Our central theme tonight, the secret that unlocks the strangeness of this world, is control. Absolute, meticulous, top-down control. And these three laws were the primary tools. Let's start with the last one, the one that sounds the most like simple, good advice, ama krilla. Don't be lazy. To our ears, laziness is a character flaw, a bad habit. In the Inca world, it was a capital crime. It was considered a form of theft, because your time and your energy did not belong to you. They belonged to the state. Entire empire functioned on a system of obligatory labor called the mita. For a set number of days each year, every able-bodied man was required to leave his home and work on state projects, building those incredible roads, quarrying stone for temples, or serving in the army. This was your tax. You paid it not with money, which didn't really exist in a way we'd recognize, but with your sweat, your muscle, and your time. So, imagine you are a farmer. You've worked your own plot of land, the plot that feeds your family. You've worked the plot of land that belongs to the local temple, to honor the gods, and now you are on your mita service, hauling granite blocks for a new fortress under the watchful eye of a state official. The sun is relentless, the altitude makes your lungs burn, and you're just tired. You slow down. You lean against a rock for a moment too long. You are not just resting. In the eyes of the state, you are a criminal. You are actively stealing labor that belongs to the Sapa Inca himself. The first offense might get you a stern public lecture or a beating from the local curaca, the village headman. The second offense, the punishments grew more severe, designed for maximum humiliation. Perhaps you would be forced to carry a heavy stone around the village square for days on end. For persistent laziness, or for failing to meet your labor quota, the sentence could easily be death. Because a lazy subject was a broken cog in a machine that required every single part to function perfectly. Your life was not your own, it was a resource. The same terrifying logic applied to ama, shua, don't steal. It sounds simple enough. But who did you steal from? In a society where most things, land, livestock, storehouses of food and cloth, were ultimately owned and controlled by the state, almost any theft was a theft from the emperor. If your neighbor's llama wandered into your field and you decided to keep it, You weren't just wronging your neighbor. You were stealing. A status set, an animal whose wool and very existence were carefully tracked on the government's intricate knotted string records, the quipu. The great storehouses, the quilkas, were filled with grain, potatoes and textiles, all collected as taxes. They were a form of social security, to be redistributed in times of famine or disaster. But if you were caught taking even a handful of grain from one of these storehouses, you weren't just a petty thief. You were undermining the economic foundation of the empire. You were stealing directly from the sun god, and the punishment for that was swift and brutal. And finally, Amalela. Don't lie. Again, it sounds like a beautiful moral principle. But its primary purpose was not to foster a culture of personal honesty. It was to ensure the absolute accuracy of the state's data. When the census takers came to your village with their quippers, they would record everything: the number of people in your household, your age, your marital status, the number of lamas you tended. This information was the bedrock of the empire. It determined labor tax quotas, military conscription, and food distribution. If you lied if you said you had 2 children instead of 3 to lower your family's future labor burden, or if you lied about your age to avoid the myth, you were committing an act of treason. You were corrupting the imperial database. A lie could unravel the fabric of control, and so it was treated with the utmost severity. Lying to a state official was an offense that could see you dropped from a cliff. So that simple, beautiful phrase, don't steal, don't lie, don't be lazy, wasn't a moral guide for living a good life. It was the user agreement for living in the Inca Empire, and you couldn't click decline. It was the ultimate expression of state control, where personal failings were redefined as political crimes. The state's needs were so absolute that even your private character was a matter of public law. It makes one wonder how this labor, this tax paid in sweat and muscle, was actually organized. Laziness wasn't just a mood, it was a defined crime against a system of relentless, mandated work that shaped every single day of your life. That relentless, mandated work hangs over your life like the ever-present mountain peaks. The crime of being lazy, Amaquila, isn't an abstract concept. It is the shadow that follows you from the moment the sun rises over the Andes. You know that at any time, an official, a local headman known as a curaka, can arrive in your village. He carries no paper, no scrolls. He carries a quipu, that strange and beautiful device of knotted strings, which tells him exactly who is of age, who is able-bodied, and whose turn it is to pay the labor tax, the mita. His arrival casts a pall over the community. It means families will be separated, for months at a time. It means a long journey on foot to a place you have never seen, to do work you have not chosen. The glamorous illusion of this system is what we see today in the breathtaking ruins of the Inca Empire. We marvel at the Capacan, the Great Inca Road, a 25,000-mile network that stitched the empire together, clinging to sheer cliff faces and crossing dizzying gorges with elegant rope bridges. We gaze in awe at the Sun Temple of Coricancha in Cusco, its walls once sheathed in plates of solid gold, or the impossible stonework of Sacsayhuam, with blocks weighing over 100 tons fitted together like a child's puzzle. We are told these are the collective achievements of a unified people, a testament to their incredible engineering skill and communal spirit. It's presented as a kind of pre-industrial utopia, where everyone cheerfully pitched in for the glory of the empire, a grand public works project for the common good. But you know the shocking reality. You are the one whose sweat and blood built it. Let's say your name is called. You are assigned to road construction. After a long trek, you find yourself on a mountainside at 13,000 feet. The air is so thin your every breath is a conscious effort, a burning in your chest. Your task is to help pave a section of the road. All day, you lift and place heavy stones. Your hands, accustomed to the soil of your farm, are raw and bleeding within the first week. The skin on your knuckles splits in the dry, cold air. Your back screams with a pain that never truly leaves, a dull fire that settles deep in your muscles. You sleep on the hard ground in a simple tent with dozens of other men, the cold seeping into your bones. The food is basic maize and potatoes, just enough to keep you working. This isn't about community spirit. It's about coercion. Hovering over you and your fellow workers is the overseer. His job is not to encourage you, but to enforce the law of Amaquila. He watches for anyone slowing down, anyone resting too long, anyone whose work is deemed substandard. He is the arbiter of laziness, a public shaming. might be the first step being forced to stand before the entire work crew while your failures are announced. A beating with a rod is a common next step. But the real fear is the charge of persistent laziness. If you are deemed a habitual shirker, you could be left behind in the wilderness, tied to a rock to be eaten by condor, or simply thrown from the very cliffside you were helping to tame. Death is not just a punishment for a crime, it is the state's way of pruning an unproductive branch. The logic is chillingly simple. You are a resource. A tool that has broken is discarded. And the danger is not just from the overseer. The work itself is a death sentence, for many. Imagine being part of a team quarrying those enormous stones for a temple. You're using primitive tools, ronds, chisels, and stone hammers. There are no safety regulations, no hard hats. A misplaced blow, a snapped rope, a moment of inattention, and a multi-ton block could crush you instantly. Or perhaps you are working on one of the famous suspension bridges, woven from grass fibers. Your job is to hang over a 1,000-foot canyon, replacing the aging ropes. The wind howls, the bridge sways violently, and your life depends on the strength of a few strands of woven grass. Many men left for their MITA service and simply never returned. They weren't recorded as casualties of a workplace accident. They were simply gone, vanished into the service of the empire. So why was this brutal system tolerated? Why would a civilization build its foundation on such a pitiless form of labor? The answer is pure, unadulterated necessity from the state's perspective. This is the why behind the horror. The Inca Empire had no currency. You couldn't pay your taxes with a pocketful of coins. The state's wealth, its power, its very ability to function, was measured in one thing: organized human labor. The MITA was the engine that powered the entire imperial machine. It moved armies, built infrastructure, and farmed the state lands that fed the bureaucracy and the military. Without the MITA, the empire would have collapsed overnight. Therefore, any threat to the labor supply, like your individual exhaustion or desire to rest, was an existential threat to the state itself. Your suffering was a calculated and necessary expense for the maintenance of imperial glory. You were not a citizen, you were a unit of energy on the Sapa Inca's balance sheet. The state owned your body, your time, and your energy for a significant portion of your adult life. You were a cog, moved and placed wherever the great imperial machine required. After months of back-breaking work, you might be allowed to return home, to your family, to the small plot of land that was yours to work. But even there, in the supposed privacy of your own home, the state's control did not end. If they could dictate how you worked, it's only a small step to dictating how you lived, and even who you lived with. You've returned from your MITA service, your body aching and your hands calloused, but you are home. The air in your small stone and thatch house, Bacancha, feels warm and familiar, thick with the comforting smell of cooking potatoes and the smoky residue of the hearth. Here, at least, you can be yourself. Here, with your family, you have some measure of freedom. This is your personal life, your sanctuary from the ever-watchful eye of the state. You can choose who you love, who you marry, and how you build your family. This is the illusion of private life, a precious and fiercely guarded space. It's a lovely thought, that the state's interest in you ends at the doorway of your home. But the shocking reality is that the state is already inside. Its control is so absolute that it extends to the most intimate decisions of your life. You don't get to choose your spouse. The state does it for you. This is the law of mandatory marriage, and it's not about love, compatibility, or personal happiness. It is, like everything else, about control, data, and taxes. Sometime during your early 20s, the local curaka or a provincial governor will arrive in your village to conduct the annual marriage ceremony. He is not a priest or a spiritual guide. He is an administrator. Think of him as a human resources manager for the empire. He is his quipu, his knotted strings, which contain the census data for the entire region. He knows who's of marriageable age, typically men around 24 to 26 and women a few years younger, from 18 to 20. He lines up all the eligible young men on one side and all the eligible young women on the other. He might consult with the families, to a degree, as a formality. He might ask your father if he has a preference among the available girls for his son. But the final decision is his. He is, quite literally, playing matchmaker for an entire community at once. He walks down the line, looking at you, then looking at the line of young women. He is not looking for a spark in your eyes. He is making a calculation. He is creating new taxable household units. A single man and a single woman are two separate data points. A married couple is a single economic unit, a new entry in the imperial ledger, responsible for farming a specific plot of land and in time producing new labourers for the state. He points at you, then points at a young woman you barely know. You two, he declares. You are now husband and wife. And that's it. There is no elaborate ceremony, no exchange of vows. Your hands might be joined together, and the official might give a speech about your obligations to the state. You are then escorted to your new home, a house built by the community in preparation for this event. You are now married. It is a legal and economic fact. Imagine the sheer awkwardness, the profound lack of romance. You are now legally bound to a practical stranger. Perhaps you had your eye on someone else. Perhaps she did, too. It doesn't matter. Your personal preference is irrelevant data. The state has decreed that you are a pair, and the law is absolute. Refusing the match is not an option. It would be an act of defiance against a state official, a rejection of the Sepa Inca's authority. It would be like refusing your mita labor, a crime punishable by severe public beating or worse. So why this bizarre and intrusive system? The why is, once again, rooted in the empire's obsession with order and control. The Inca state was a masterpiece of social engineering, and the family unit was the foundational block. They needed society to be neatly organized, predictable, and, above all, countable. Unmarried individuals were loose ends, messy data points that complicated the census. Mandatory marriage ensured that everyone was neatly filed away into a household unit. This made calculating labor taxes, mita, military levies, and agricultural production quotas vastly simpler. A tidy, married populace was an easily managed populace. Furthermore, it was about procreation as a state policy. The empire needed a steady supply of new bodies to replace those lost to war, disease, and the grueling labor tax. Marriage was not a romantic institution. It was the state-sanctioned mechanism for producing future taxpayers and soldiers. Your new home, your new spouse, it was all part of the imperial production line. You were now officially a tax-paying, baby-making unit of the empire. There was one tiny, almost comical exception. If a man and a woman had, shall we say, anticipated the state's decision and were already living together and had a child before the official came to pair them off, this was called servinacui. In this specific case, the state official would almost always formally recognize their union. It wasn't out of a sense of romanticism. It was a pragmatic acknowledgement that this couple had already proven their ability to be a productive household unit. They had, in a sense, done the state's work for it. They were already her success story in the imperial project of procreation. So you are now married, your partner chosen for you by a government official based on demographics. Your life is structured. Your household is registered. You are clothed and fed. But even the very clothes on your back are not a matter of personal choice. They are another tool of state control, a uniform you are legally required to wear. You stand beside your new, state-appointed spouse, outside your new, state-provided home. The life ahead of you feels predetermined. But at least you can express who you are through your appearance, right? You can choose the colors of your tunic, the style of your headband, the patterns you weave into your cloak. This is the realm of personal expression, the art and fashion that gives life its texture and individuality. The glamorous illusion is what we see in museums today, the dazzling textiles of the Inca and their predecessors. We see ponchos and tunics of breathtaking complexity, woven from the impossibly soft wool of vicuas, dyed in brilliant reds, blues, and yellows. The patterns are geometric and mesmerizing, a vibrant artistic tradition that seems to celebrate creativity and personal flair. We imagine a world of color and style, where people wore their identity with pride. But the shocking reality is that you had almost zero say in what you wore. Your clothing was not a form of self-expression. It was a legally enforced identity card, another layer of the empire's obsession with control. To wear the wrong pattern, the wrong color, or even the wrong hat was a serious crime. Let's look at your tunic, your unku. The specific patterns woven into it, the tukapu, are not just pretty designs. They are a code. They signify your ethnicity, your social rank, and your geographic origin. If you are from a coastal group, your tunic will have patterns of fish and sea birds. If you are from the highlands, it might feature llamas and mountain gods. The state dictated these designs. When the Incas conquered a new territory, they didn't just demand tribute and labor. They often dictated the specific clothing the conquered people were required to wear from that point forward. It was a way of branding them, of making them instantly identifiable within the imperial system. Imagine you are traveling with permission, of course, to a neighboring valley for a market festival. An official can tell at a single glance who you are, where you are from, and what your social standing is, just by looking at the clothes on your back. There is no anonymity. You are wearing your government file. And if you tried to get clever, if you decided you liked the look of the tunics worn by the people from the next province and wove one for yourself, you would be committing a crime. Impersonating someone from a different region or a higher social class was a direct challenge to the state's rigid social order. It was like forging a passport. The punishment could be a brutal flogging or forced servitude, a stark reminder that your identity belonged to the state, not to you. The materials themselves were also strictly regulated. As a commoner, you wear clothing made from the coarse wool of llamas or the fibers of the agave plant. It's durable and functional, but it's not particularly comfortable. It's itchy. That incredibly soft, silky wool from the vicure, the cloth that feels like a cloud against the skin. It is illegal for you to wear it. Vicure wool was reserved exclusively for the Sepa Inca and the highest nobility. The vicure was considered a sacred animal, the property of the sun god himself. Great royal hunts would be organized where thousands of people would form a human chain to round up the animals. They would be sheared, and then released. If you, a commoner, were caught killing a vicure or even possessing its wool, the penalty was death. No trial, no appeal. You had touched something meant only for the divine. Even your head was subject to the law. Type of hat or headband you wore, your law too, was also a mandatory indicator of your regional identity. One group might wear a simple woven band, another a tasseled cap, and another a distinctive round, flat-topped hat. Like the patterns on your tunic, your headwear instantly signaled your place in the grand imperial scheme. So why this obsession with regulating fashion? This is the why that makes the system, in its own cold way, logical. It was about instant information retrieval in a world without writing as we know it. An official didn't need to ask you for your papers. He could read your tunic. It allowed for rapid identification, social sorting, and control of movement. It helped prevent rebellion by making it impossible for people from different regions to gather secretly without their origins being obvious. It reinforced the social hierarchy every single day, reminding everyone of their specific place. The Sepa Inca, in his glowing vicure robes, was visually, tangibly, separate from the commoner in his scratchy llama wool. The law was written not on paper, but on the very bodies of the empire's subjects. Your clothes are a uniform. Your marriage is a state-mandated contract. Your work is a tax paid in muscle. Every facet of your life is engineered for the smooth functioning of the state. But there must be some escape, some small pleasure that is yours alone. Perhaps the simple act of chewing coca leaves, the sacred plant of the Andes that numbs the cold and dulls the ache of hunger and fatigue. Surely that small comfort is left to your own discretion. But even that private ritual is subject to the law. The ache in your muscles is a constant companion, a dull fire left over from your mitter service. The gnawing emptiness in your stomach is another, a reminder that the food you eat is rationed, first for the state, then for the gods, and finally for you. But you have a small, precious solace. In a little woven bag, a chuspa, hanging from your belt, you carry a handful of dried coca leaves. You take a few, one by one, and place them in your cheek, adding a tiny sliver of ash or lime to activate their power. Slowly, as you chew, a gentle numbness spreads through your mouth. The pangs of hunger recede. The chill of the mountain air seems less biting. A quiet energy flows into your weary limbs. This is not a drug in the way we might think of it. It is a sacrament, a medicine, a tradition stretching back thousands of years before the Inca. It is your personal comfort. The glamorous illusion surrounding coca is that it was a sacred gift from the gods, freely available to the hard-working people of the Andes a natural part of daily life that helped them thrive in a harsh environment. We imagine a populace freely partaking in this gentle stimulant, a cultural touchstone woven into the fabric of society, a simple pleasure for the common man. It's a romantic picture of a people in harmony with their sacred plants. But the shocking reality is that during the height of the Inca Empire, you, a common farmer, were probably forbidden from using it. The state seized control of this sacred leaf and turned it into another tool of power, a luxury item doled out by the government as a reward and a method of control. The free and easy access you might have imagined was a thing of the distant past. Under Inca law, the cultivation of coca was a state monopoly. The best coca-growing lands, in the humid eastern slopes of the Andes, were seized and became property of the emperor. The leaves were harvested, dried and transported by state workers to the imperial storehouses, the kulkas, where they were kept under lock and key, just like the grain, wool and potatoes. A state official with his quipper meticulously tracked every single leaf. It was a strategic resource, far too valuable to be left in the hands of the common people. So who was allowed to use it? The law was very clear. Coca was reserved for the elite. The Sapa Inca and his family used it constantly. The nobility, the high priests and top government officials were granted regular allotments. It was a status symbol, a visible sign of their elevated position. When you saw someone chewing coca, you knew they were important. It was also used in religious rituals. Priests would burn the leaves as offerings to the gods, or read the future in the patterns of smoke and ash. It was the food of the divine, not for the likes of you. There were, however, a few highly controlled exceptions where a commoner like yourself might be granted the privilege. The state, in its cold pragmatism, knew the leaf's power. If you were a messenger, a chaski, tasked with running for miles at high altitude to deliver a message, you would be given a pouch of coca leaves. It wasn't for your pleasure. It was fuel. It was a performance-enhancing substance to ensure you could do your job for the state more effectively. Similarly, if your mitter service took you to the brutal conditions of a high-altitude mine, you might be given a coca ration. Again, this was not an act of kindness. It was a calculated decision to numb your misery, suppress your appetite, and squeeze more labor out of your body before you collapsed. It was a tool to make you a more efficient cog in the imperial machine. For you, a simple farmer, to be caught with coca leaves without authorization would be a grave offense. Growing a personal coca bush would be unthinkable, a crime on par with treason. It would be like a modern person trying to print their own money. You would be stealing a strategic asset directly from the Sapa Inca. The punishment would be swift and terrible, designed to make an example of you. The why behind this strict regulation is a masterclass in Inca statecraft. By transforming a common cultural plant into a state-controlled luxury, the Incas achieved several things at once. First, they created a powerful new status symbol to reinforce the social hierarchy. Elites were visibly marked by their access to the sacred leaf. Second, it gave them a potent tool for rewarding loyalty. A local curaka who met his tax quotas might be rewarded with a gift of coca, ensuring his continued cooperation. Soldiers who fought bravely might be given coca, a powerful motivator. It became a form of currency in a moneyless economy, a currency of favor and power. And finally, by controlling its use as a stimulant for laborers in the most extreme conditions, they could push the boundaries of human endurance for the benefit of the state. Your access to a simple leaf, a small comfort against the cold, was controlled by the state. The clothes you wore were a state-issued uniform. Your spouse was chosen for you. Your job was a form of tax. The very ground beneath your feet, the small plot where you grew your family's food, felt like the only thing you had. But even that came with a catch. You couldn't just pack up and leave. Your world is small, circumscribed by the mountains that cup your village in their stony hands. You know every terrace, every irrigation ditch, every family in your ailu, your local community. The land is not technically yours, it belongs to the Sapa Inca, and you are granted the right to work it, but it feels like yours. It's the land of your ancestors. Your parents worked this same soil, and their parents before them. Your life is tied to this specific place by bonds of tradition, labor, and memory. The idea of leaving seems unnatural. But what if you wanted to? What if the land in the next valley seemed more fertile, or you heard whispers of an easier life in a different province? The freedom to move, to seek a better opportunity elsewhere, is a fundamental human desire. This is the glamorous illusion, a stable, rooted society where people lived in harmony with their ancestral lands for generations. We picture a deeply connected populace, content in their villages, secure in the knowledge that they belong to a place, and it belonged to them. It paints a portrait of profound stability, a world without the modern anxieties of displacement and rootlessness. But the shocking reality is that you were not rooted by choice. You were tethered by law. The crime of changing your address was a serious offense. You were, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner of your own zip code. The Inca state, in its quest for absolute control, catalogued you by your place of birth. Your entry on the Great Imperial Quipper Ledger included your name, your age, your marital status, and your elu. To move without permission was to throw that meticulous census into chaos. Imagine your crops have failed for 2 seasons in a row. A blight has withered your potatoes in the ground. Your family is hungry. You hear from a travelling merchant of the few people allowed to move freely that the harvest in a province a week's walk to the south was bountiful. It's a tempting thought. You could pack your few belongings in the dead of night, take your family, and slip away. You could try to start a new life, to blend into a new community where the rains have been kinder. But you would be a fugitive. Every step of your journey would be fraught with peril. Remember the law of forbidden fashion? Your clothes would instantly betray you. The moment you entered a new province, the local officials would see your tunic, your hat, and know you did not belong. You would be a walking anomaly, a data error. There would be questions. Where is your travel permit? Who is your curaka? Why have you left your designated land? Lying would be a death sentence, as we know. Telling the truth would be just as bad. If you were caught, you would be treated as a criminal. The punishment for unauthorized movement was severe. You would likely be beaten and forcibly marched back to your home village. There, you would be publicly shamed, a lesson to anyone else who might get similar ideas. In some cases, especially for repeat offenders, the punishment could be death. You had, in the state's eyes, abandoned your post. You had shirked your future labor obligations. You had become a non-person, an undata point, and the system could not tolerate such loose ends. The why for this rigid law is central to the Inca concept of a controlled economy. The empire was not a free market. It was a command economy, a vast, centrally planned system of production and redistribution. The state decided what would be grown where. This valley was designated for maize production. The next, for potatoes. The high grasslands were for llama herds. This careful agricultural zoning was essential for the empire's food security. If people were allowed to move freely, chasing rumors of better land, the entire system would collapse. There would be a surplus of farmers in one region and a desperate shortage in another. The state's meticulously planned agricultural output would become unpredictable and unreliable. Your immobility was the price of the empire's stability. You were a component part of a regional agricultural machine, and you were not allowed to leave your station. But there was a terrifying exception to this rule. While you were forbidden from moving by your own choice, the state reserved the right to move you against your will. This policy was called mitma. If the Incas conquered a new, rebellious territory, they would often forcibly remove the entire local population and march them hundreds of miles away to a region populated by loyal Inca subjects. Then, they would take people from a loyal, established region people like you and force them to relocate to the newly conquered, hostile lands. Imagine the terror. One day, the curaka informs your entire elu that you are to be resettled. You have to abandon the land your family has worked for centuries. You pack what you can carry and are marched away, under armed guard, to a place you have never seen, whose climate you don't understand, and where the local population hates you because you are a symbol of their conquerors. You are a human shield, a tool of pacification. Your life has been completely uprooted for the strategic convenience of the state. This was the ultimate demonstration of power. The state not only controlled where you couldn't go, it controlled exactly where you had to go. So, you are bound to your village, forbidden to travel. Yet, crisscrossing the empire is the most sophisticated road system on the continent. These roads pass near your village, a constant, tantalizing reminder of a wider world you are forbidden to see. From your village, you can see it. A line cut into the landscape with impossible precision. It is the Capacan, the great Inca road. It is an artery of the empire. You see it climbing a distant ridge, a series of stone steps ascending into the clouds. You see it crossing a gorge on a suspension bridge that seems to hang in the air by magic. It is a marvel of engineering, a symbol of this power and unity of the Sepa Inca's domain. Messengers, officials, and armies move along it with incredible speed. It is the most impressive thing you have ever seen, a direct link to the heart of the empire in Cusco and to its farthest flung corners. The glamorous illusion is that this road was a public work for the benefit of all. A superhighway connecting the people, fostering trade, communication, and a sense of shared identity across a vast and difficult terrain. We imagine merchants with their llama caravans, pilgrims on their way to great shrines, families traveling to visit relatives, a bustling network of human activity, the lifeblood of a connected society. It seems like the Inca version of the Roman roads, a gift to the populace that knitted the world together. But the shocking reality for you, a commoner, is that you are forbidden to set foot on it. The roads you couldn't travel were, in fact, almost all of them. The Capacan was for official state use only. It was not a public highway. It was a private, government-controlled utility. For you to walk on its carefully paved surface without a state-sanctioned reason and the proper identification was a serious crime. Imagine you need to visit your cousin in the next village, just 5 miles away. A branch of the Great Road runs directly between the two settlements, a smooth, wide, easy path. It would take you an hour or two to walk it. But you can't. Instead, you have to take a rough, winding dirt track that zigzags down the valley and back up again, a journey of half a day. The main road is right there, tantalizingly close, but it is not for you. The road was patrolled. At regular intervals, there were checkpoints and small guard stations called pucaras. If you were found on the road, you would be stopped and questioned. Who are you? Where are you going? Where is your permit? Remember your state-mandated clothing? It would immediately identify you as a local farmer, someone with no official business. If you couldn't produce a compelling, state-approved reason for being there, you would be punished. The road was a sterile corridor for the business of the empire, and the general public was seen as a contaminant. The people you would see on the road were all on state business. There were the chasks, the relay runners, sprinting from one station to the next, carrying quipu messages and small parcels. They were the lifeblood of the imperial communication system, and they could travel up to 150 miles in a single day. You would see imperial officials, the ears of the Sepa Inca, traveling to conduct a census or inspect a provincial storehouse. You would see columns of soldiers, their bronze-tipped spears glinting in the sun, marching to a distant border or to put down a rebellion. You would see long caravans of llamas, but they weren't private merchants. They were state caravans, transporting grain from the state storehouses or hauling quarried stone for a state construction project. Every single person and animal on that road was an agent or a set of the government. The why behind this strict law is, again, about absolute control. An open road system would be a security nightmare for a totalitarian state. It would allow for the uncontrolled movement of people, which we already know was a crime. Rebels could use the roads to organize. Information rumors, dissent, news of a crop failure could spread like wildfire outside of the state's carefully managed channels. A closed road system kept the populace isolated, manageable, and ignorant of the wider workings of the empire. It was also a matter of efficiency. The road needed to be clear for the swift movement of armies and official messengers. A traffic jam of local farmers and their llamas would slow down the vital business of the state. So the road, the ultimate symbol of connection, was for you a symbol of exclusion. It was a physical manifestation of the hierarchy. The state moved on a separate, elevated plane while you were confined to the muddy back paths. It was a constant, visible reminder of your place. You were a stationary subject in a dynamic empire, a farmer who provided the food and labor, but who was not permitted to participate in the grand imperial project beyond your designated role. This system of control, from your marriage to your clothes to your inability to travel, all depended on accurate information. The state needed to know who you were, what you were doing, and whether you were complying. And all of that information, every detail of your life and the life of the Empire, was recorded not in words, but in the intricate twists and knots of the mysterious quipu. And to that knotted string, you owed absolute honesty. In the center of your village square, an official from the provincial capital has arrived. He is a quipu Kamayok, a keeper of the knotted strings. He is one of the most respected and feared men in the Empire. In his hands, he holds the official record of your community, a cluster of colored strings dangling like a strange, fibrous jellyfish. This is the quipu. It is not just a bundle of cords. It is a sophisticated, three-dimensional spreadsheet. The colors of the strings, the way they are plied, the types of knots, and their position on the cords all hold specific meanings. It is the memory of the state, its hard drive, its operating system. The glamorous illusion of the quipu is that it was a primitive but clever accounting tool, a simple mnemonic device used by a proliterate society to keep track of basic inventory, so many llamas, so much grain, so many people. We see them in museums, inert and indecipherable, and view them as a charmingly rustic solution to the problem of data storage. We might even imagine a quipu Kamayok as a sort of folksy town clerk, keeping track of village life with his quaint, colorful strings. But the shocking reality is that the quipu was an instrument of immense power, and the law surrounding it was absolute. Lying to a quipu Kamayok was not just a sin, it was a capital crime. The information he gathered from you was not for a local history project. It was vital intelligence for the state, and corrupting that intelligence was an act of treason. This was the infallible knotted string. You and the other heads of households are called forward, one by one. The quipu Kamayok doesn't read the quipu in the way we read a book. He runs his fingers over the knots, feeling the data. He might have a small team with him, cross-referencing multiple quipus to ensure accuracy. He is conducting the annual census, updating the master record. He asks you questions, his voice flat and official. How many in your household? What are their ages? How many new births this year? How many deaths? What was your potato yield from the household plot? What was your yield from the state's plot? You are tempted to lie. Remember the law of mandatory labor? Your son is approaching the age of mita service. If you tell the quipu Kamayok he is a year younger than he truly is, you might spare him a season of back-breaking work in a distant mine. Or perhaps your harvest was poor, and you are ashamed. You consider inflating the numbers to appear more productive, to avoid the shame of being seen as a lazy or incompetent farmer. You dare not. The quipu Kamayok is not just an accountant, he is an auditor and an interrogator. His system has checks and balances that are terrifyingly effective. He has the quipu from last year. He knows exactly what you reported then. He can see the discrepancy. He might have a separate quipu that tracks deaths, provided by the person in the elu responsible for burials. Another quipu might track births. If your numbers don't align with the other data sets, he will know you are lying. The knots on the quipu were likely based on a decimal system, making mathematical calculations straightforward for a trained user. He can add the yields of all the households and check them against the total amount of grain delivered to the state storehouse, which has its own quipu Kamayok tracking inventory. If there is a shortfall, an investigation will be launched. Someone is lying. Someone is stealing. And the system is designed to find them. The why behind this severe law is the very foundation of the Inca state. The empire was a data-driven enterprise. Without accurate numbers, the entire system of centralized planning would fail. The state couldn't calculate labor taxes, conscript soldiers, or redistribute food in a famine if its census data was unreliable. The quipu was the source code of the empire. Corrupting it was like introducing a fatal virus. The state's response, therefore, had to be absolute. A lie to the quipu Kamayok was a direct attack on the Sapa Inca's ability to rule. The punishment was designed to ensure no one would ever consider it. You might be taken to the highest point above the village and thrown off, your death a brutal lesson in the importance of truth, not moral truth, but the truth of numbers, the truth the state demanded. The quipu system was so trusted that it was even used in a legal capacity. If there was a dispute over land or resources between two alas, the historic quipus would be brought out. The Quipucamayok would interpret the knotted records of past yields and boundaries, and his reading was considered infallible evidence. His judgment was final. This reverence for the data and the officials who managed it extended all the way to the top. The Quipucamayok was a powerful figure, but he was just a servant. His power was a reflection of the ultimate authority, the divine emperor himself, the Sapa Inca. And if lying to one of his data collectors was a capital crime, the laws surrounding your personal interaction with the living God were on an entirely different level of severity. The day has come. A tremor of excitement and terror runs through your entire province. The Sapa Inca himself, the son of the sun, the divine emperor, is passing through on a royal procession. For weeks, the roads are ones you are forbidden to travel have been swept clean. Flowers have been gathered. Everyone has been ordered to wear their finest, but still legally mandated clothing. He will be carried on a magnificent litter of gold and feathers, surrounded by his royal guards and nobles in their shimmering vicua wool. It is a spectacle of unimaginable power and wealth, designed to awe and intimidate. To catch a glimpse of the living God is a once-in-a-lifetime event. The glamorous illusion is one of a beloved ruler connecting with his people. The grand parade, a moment of communal celebration where the subjects can see their glorious emperor, the center of their universe, and feel a part of his divine radiance. We imagine cheering crowds, a feeling of deep reverence and love, a people honored by the presence of their king. It's a vision of divine monarchy at its most majestic and inspiring. But the shocking reality is a protocol of terror. You are not there to cheer. You are there to be silent, to be prostrate, and above all, to be unseen. The law of lines of sight was one of the most rigidly enforced in the empire. You were forbidden from looking the Sapa Inca in the eye. In fact, you were forbidden from looking at him at all. As the procession approaches, you and everyone else in your village are ordered to line the route. But you are not standing. You are on your knees, your face to the ground. Your forehead is pressed into the dirt. To lift your head, to raise your eyes and gaze upon the divine countenance of the Sapa Inca, was a crime so profound that the punishment was immediate death. The royal guards who flanked the litter were not there just to protect him from assassins. They were there to watch the crowd for any flicker of a raised head, any sign of a forbidden glance. A swift club to the back of the head or a spear thrust would be the instant reward for your curiosity. Even the highest nobles in the land were not exempt from this protocol, which is the most telling detail. When a great lord or a provincial governor was granted the rare privilege of an audience with the Sapa Inca in his palace in Cusco, he could not simply walk in. He had to enter barefoot, and he had to carry a symbolic burden on his back, a small bundle of wood or a stunner to signify that even he, a man of immense power, was a humble servant in the presence of the divine. He too would keep his eyes fixed on the floor, never daring to meet the emperor's gaze. He would speak to the Sapa Inca through a screen or a courtier, for to speak to him directly was a privilege granted to almost no one. The why behind this extreme law of sight is the core of the Sapa Inca's political and religious power. He was not just a king. He was a god on earth, the literal son of the sun god, Inti. To look a god in the eye is to challenge him, to imply equality. It is an act of supreme arrogance that cannot be tolerated. The law was designed to create an unbridgeable chasm between the divine ruler and his mortal subjects. His power was maintained through this mystique, this aura of untouchable, unseeable divinity. By forcing his subjects, even the most powerful ones, into a position of physical abasement, he reinforced his absolute superiority at every moment. You couldn't rebel against a force you couldn't even look at. The visceral, groveling reality of this encounter is a world away from the fantasy of a cheering crowd. There is no connection. There is only power and submission. The air is thick, not with love, but with fear. The only sound is the tramp of the soldiers' feet and the creak of the golden litter. You keep your head down, smelling the dust, praying no one misinterprets a nervous twitch as an act of defiance. You might catch a fleeting glimpse of the litter's golden edge, or the sandals of a bearer as it passes. That is all you will ever see of your god. This extreme control over personal interaction, this legal separation between the ruler and the ruled, was a public and political matter. But this obsession with regulating who could look at whom, and who could touch whom, also extended into the most private aspects of life. If the mere glance at an emperor was a capital crime, you can only imagine the legal consequences for a forbidden glance or a forbidden touch in the context of marriage. You are in your state-assigned marriage, a practical arrangement for farming and procreation. Love may or may not be a part of it, but respect and duty certainly are. The family unit, as you know, is the bedrock of the state's control. It's a stable, predictable, taxable entity. Your fidelity to your spouse is not just a personal matter of morality. It is a matter of upholding the state-sanctioned social order. The glamorous illusion is of a society with strong family values, where the sanctity of marriage was deeply respected, leading to a stable and harmonious domestic life for all. A world without the messy complications of jealousy and infidelity, a utopia of marital bliss enforced by a shared moral code. But the shocking reality is that the crime of a wandering eye adultery was treated with a level of brutal, spectacular, and public violence that is difficult for us to comprehend. The punishments were not meant to be corrective, they were meant to be terrifyingly theatrical, a form of state-sponsored horror designed to etch the law into the collective memory of the community. Let's say a man from your elu is accused of sleeping with another man's wife. The accusation alone is enough to trigger a formal investigation by the curaka. There is no presumption of innocence. The goal is to establish the facts for the purpose of punishment. If the two are found guilty, the community is assembled in the village square. This is not a private matter to be dealt with behind closed doors. Justice, in the Inca world, must be seen. The punishments varied by region and the social status of the individuals, but they were almost always fatal and gruesome. The guilty man might be tied to a post and stoned to death by the members of his own community, including the husband he wronged. This wasn't just vengeance, it was a form of ritual purification for the elu. His accomplice, the woman, might suffer the same fate. In some accounts, the punishment was even more specific to the crime. Both the man and woman could be tied to a rock and left to starve, their slow, agonizing deaths a warning to anyone watching. One of the most frequently cited punishments was particularly horrific in its symmetry. The guilty man and woman would be brought to the edge of a cliff. The woman's husband would be given a choice. He could forgive his wife and watch as only her lover was thrown to his death. Or he could demand the ultimate price. If he chose the latter, his wife would be hung by her hair from the cliff's edge, and he would be forced to watch as she slowly strangled, a human pendulum of shame. Her lover would then be executed immediately after, often by being thrown from the same cliff. Even for the nobility, the law was unforgiving. In fact, the higher your social rank, the more severe the punishment, as your crime was seen as a greater betrayal of the public trust. A high-ranking noblewoman who committed adultery wasn't just executed, she was subjected to the warchi, the torment death. This could involve elaborate and prolonged torture before the final blow was delivered, all of it public. Her lover would suffer the same fate. Their bodies would not be given a proper burial, they would be left for the condors and wild animals, a final, terrible desecration. The why behind this extreme, theatrical brutality is twofold. First, it was about protecting the integrity of the state's data. A child born of an adulterous affair was a data anomaly. Who is the father? To which household unit does this child belong? Whose land will it inherit the right to work? It introduced chaos into the meticulously ordered census recorded on the quipu. An illegitimate child was a bug in the system, and the state's response was to eradicate the source of the error with extreme prejudice. Second, and more importantly, it was about property. A wife, in the cold legal framework of the Inca Empire, was considered a form of property belonging to her husband. Remember how the state assigned you a spouse? It was a transaction. Adultery was therefore not a crime of passion, it was a crime of theft. The adulterous man had stolen from another man, and the woman had conspired in the theft of her own self. The brutal punishments reflect the severity with which the state treated any form of theft, especially one that so profoundly disrupted the social and economic order of the household. The public, theatrical nature of the punishment served as a powerful deterrent, a piece of civic theatre that reinforced the state's control over your most intimate relationships. The state's obsession with control and order was so complete that it even dictated your state of mind. Fidelity was mandatory. Sobriety was mandatory. But, in the strange and contradictory world of Inca law, so was getting drunk, but only when the state told you to. Life in your village is one of rigid sobriety. The air is clear of a drunkard shouting, the paths are free of stumbling bodies. There is a quiet, industrious hum to everything. You know that public drunkenness is a serious crime. The law of Amma, Quilla don't be lazy extended to this as well. A person who is drunk cannot perform their labour duties. They are, in the eyes of the state, a useless and unproductive unit. To be found intoxicated on a normal day would be to invite a harsh punishment from the Kuraka. You could be beaten, publicly shamed, or forced to perform extra, menial labour, as penance for your indulgence. The glamorous illusion is of a perfectly temperate society, a civilization of clear-headed, hard-working people who had transcended the messy vice of alcohol for the common good, a place of perpetual, disciplined order. But the shocking reality is that this sobriety was punctuated by moments of legally mandated, state-sponsored, mass intoxication. This is the law of scheduled intoxication. Drunkenness was a crime, except for the specific times when it was a compulsory civic duty. Several times a year, your entire Elu is commanded to gather for a religious festival. These are not quiet, solemn affairs. They are enormous, multi-day parties centered around the ritual consumption of vast quantities of chicha, a fermented maize beer. The state storehouses, the quilkas, which are normally under lock and key, are opened. Huge ceramic vessels of chicha are brought to the village square. The local kuraka or a visiting official presides over the ceremony. This is not an invitation. It is a command performance. Every one man and woman is expected to drink. And not just to have a sip. You are expected to get profoundly, stupendously drunk. Imagine the scene. The chicha, thick and milky, is ladled out into ceremonial cups. The official makes a toast to the Sapa Inca and to the gods, the sun god Inti, the mountain gods, the Apus. Then the drinking begins in earnest. To refuse to drink would be an insult to the gods and a grave offense to the Sapa Inca. It would be seen as an act of social defiance, a sign that you were separating yourself from the community. In this context, sobriety is the crime. You must drink. You must laugh. You must dance until you can no longer stand. You must participate in the collective loss of control. For days, the entire community is plunged into a state of ritualized chaos. The normal rules of rigid discipline are suspended. People sing, feast, and drink until they pass out. It is a scene of utter abandon. A complete reversal of the day-to-day reality of sober, disciplined labor. You, who would be flogged for stumbling drunk on a normal Tuesday, are now socially and legally required to drink yourself into a stupor. So what is the why behind this bizarre contradiction? Why would a state so obsessed with control mandate periodic, total loss of control? It was a brilliantly cynical piece of social engineering. These festivals acted as a societal pressure release valve. The Inca leadership understood that a life of constant, grueling labor and rigid social control was psychologically crushing. The mandated festivals provided a temporary, sanctioned escape. It was a way to let the populace blow off steam in a controlled environment, preventing the build-up of resentments that could lead to actual rebellion. Furthermore, it was a powerful tool for social cohesion. By forcing everyone to participate in this collective act of drunkenness, the state reinforced the bonds of the community. It was our shared experience that broke down individual inhibitions and merged everyone into a single compliant mass. The next day, nursing a collective hangover, the community would return to its sober, hard-working state, its frustrations vented, its social bonds reaffirmed through the shared ritual. It was a strategic deployment of chaos to maintain order. The state gave you this gift of intoxication, and this generosity reinforced its authority and your dependence on its goodwill for any form of pleasure or release. This state-managed intoxication was for the living. But the state's control didn't stop there. It also had to manage those who crossed the line not into drunkenness, but into the realm of the supernatural. For in the Inca world, even an act of nature, like a lightning strike, could be interpreted as a crime. You live your life in a state of constant, low-grade fear of the law. You fear the Kuraka's judgment, the Quiquicamayock's audit, and the royal guard's enforcers. You do everything you can to remain compliant, to be a good, invisible cog in the great machine. You follow the rules. You keep your head down. You work hard. You stay sober on weekdays. You wear the right hat. Surely, if you are a model subject, you will be safe. You believe that justice, however harsh, is at least predictable. You will only be punished if you break one of the Saper Inca's laws. This is the illusion of a just, if strict, legal system. But the shocking reality is that you could be punished if and executed for something entirely outside of your control. You could be found guilty of the crime of being a bad omen. And there was no more potent bad omen than being struck by lightning and surviving. The Andes are famous for their violent, dramatic thunderstorms. In the rainy season, the sky can turn black in minutes and lightning forks across the sky, striking the high peaks with terrifying force. You and your fellow villagers view these storms with a mixture of awe and dread. Lightning was the physical manifestation of the weather god, Ilapa. It was a divine force, a direct communication from the supernatural world. Imagine you are out in your fields, trying to bring in your llamas before a sudden storm hits. The air crackles with energy. A blinding flash, a deafening crash, and the world goes white. You wake up minutes later, your clothes singed, your body trembling, a strange, metallic taste in your mouth. You have been struck by lightning. And you have survived. Your first feeling might be relief, a profound gratitude for being alive. But that feeling would quickly curse into terror. You have not been blessed. You've been marked. When your fellow villagers find you, they will not rush to help you. They will recoil in fear. In the Inca worldview, a person struck by lightning was considered to have been touched by a powerful and dangerous god. But this was not a holy touch. It was a sign that you had committed some secret, unforgivable sin, a crime so foul that the gods themselves had tried to strike you down. Your survival was not a miracle. It was a cosmic error. You were now a walking contamination, a cursed being, a kamakan, who carried a dangerous energy. You would be immediately ostracized. Your family would be forbidden from speaking to you. You would not be allowed to enter any home. You are now taboo. The local priest would be summoned. After a series of rituals, a judgment would be made. In many cases, the only way to purify the community and appease the angered god was to finish the job that the lightning had started. You could be sentenced to death. You might be sacrificed on a mountain top or walled up alive in a small chamber, a final offering to the god you had somehow offended. There was no defense. You could not argue your case. You were not being punished for an action, but for what had been done to you. You were a bad omen, and the state, in its obsession with order, could not tolerate such a potent symbol of divine displeasure and cosmic chaos. Your continued existence was a threat to the spiritual well-being of the community. The why behind this seemingly insane law lies in the Inca belief that there was no separation between the natural and the human worlds. A crop failure was not just bad luck, it was a sign of the gods' anger. An earthquake was a divine judgment. A person struck by lightning was a living embodiment of this divine wrath. The state's role was to maintain not just social order, but cosmic order. This required identifying and eliminating any sources of spiritual pollution. You, the lightning strike survivor, were a piece of cosmic static, and the state's duty was to restore the clear signal between the human world and the world of the gods. Sometimes, in a strange twist, the opposite could happen. The house or field that was struck by lightning would be declared a huaca, a holy place. It would be cordoned off, and no one would be allowed to farm or live there again. Offerings would be made to it. The place became sacred, while the person who was struck became a pariah. This deep entanglement of law, religion, and the supernatural extended most powerfully to the realm of the dead. The gods could mark you for death, but your obligations to the state did not end when your life did. And as you were to learn, the dead themselves held a legal status that was far more powerful than your own. You live your entire life in service to the Saper Inca, the living god. You work his land, wear his mandated clothing, and obey his laws. Your world is structured around the power that flows from the top down. But there is another power, an older one, that flows from the bottom up from the very soil itself. This is the power of your ancestors. You mummify your dead, wrapping them in fine textiles and keeping them in the family home or a nearby tomb. You speak to them, bring them food and chicha on special occasions and ask for their guidance. They are not gone. They are just in a different state of being. This reverence for the ancestors is the heart of your spiritual life. The glamorous illusion is that this ancestor worship was a quaint, personal, and purely religious custom. We picture a gentle, spiritual connection to the past, where families honored their departed loved ones in a way that brought comfort and a sense of continuity. It seems like a beautiful expression of family love and respect, a private matter of faith and remembrance. But the shocking reality is that this was not just a custom, it was a legally binding system of property ownership. The laws of the dead were some of the most powerful in the empire, because your ancestor mummies legally owned the best land in the empire. And they didn't just own it in spirit. They owned it in a way that would be recognized by any modern court. When a Sapa Inca died, his body was meticulously mummified. But his death did not mean the end of his property rights. All the land, palaces, and wealth he had accumulated during his life continued to belong to him. His mummified corpse, his malquai, remained the legal owner. This mummy was not sealed away in a pyramid. It was housed in its own palace in Cusco, attended by a vast retinue of servants. It had its own staff, its own musicians, and its own priests. Its lands continued to be farmed, and all the revenue from those lands went to maintaining the mummy's court and funding the political activities of its lineage, the Panica. Imagine the scene in Cusco. On major festival days, these mummies were brought out into the main square. Dressed in fine clothes and adorned with gold, they were seated on litters in a circle, in order of their reign. They were consulted on important matters of state. A priest would speak for the mummy, interpreting its will. They were served food and drink, with servants holding chicha cups to their desiccated lips and burning food offerings before them. To an outsider, it would look like a grotesque tea party with the dead. To the Inca, it was a vital political council. This had a staggering economic consequence. Each new Sapa Inca who came to the throne inherited the title and the power, but he inherited almost no land or wealth. He had to build his own fortune from scratch by conquering new territories. This is the why behind the law, and it is perhaps the most brilliant and destabilizing legal concept the Incas ever devised. This system of mummy ownership created a powerful engine for constant imperial expansion. A new emperor couldn't just live off the family fortune. The family fortune was still being used by his dead great-great-great-grandfather. To fund his own government and secure his own legacy, he had no choice but to conquer, to add new lands and tribute-paying subjects to the empire. The dead were legally forcing the living to expand the empire. This had a direct impact on you, the commoner. The best, most fertile lands in the Cusco Valley were owned by long-dead emperors. Your Elu might be working land that legally belonged to a mummy who had been dead for 200 years. A portion of your harvest went, not to the living Sapa Inca, but to the upkeep of a corpse's palace. The legal power of these mummies was, in a very real sense, greater than your own. As a living person, you had no land rights. You only had the right to work the land. The dead emperor, however, had permanent, inalienable property rights. This system created an ever-growing, parasitic aristocracy of the dead. As more emperors died, more prime land was taken out of the state's direct control and put into the hands of these mummy cults, each with its own powerful political agenda. By the time the Spanish arrived, this system was causing immense internal stress, as the amount of available land for a new emperor to conquer was shrinking, while the demands of the dead continued to grow. So, you lived in a world where you could be executed for looking at a living god, but where a dead god could own the ground beneath your feet. It was a world of swift, brutal, and inescapable justice. But what did that justice actually look like? If the state's control was so total, what need was there for that one feature of every other legal system, a prison? You live in a society governed by a web of intricate and terrifying laws. The rules dictate who you marry, what you wear, where you live, and what you think. The punishments for transgression are swift and often fatal. You see the power of the state all around you, in the figure of the curaka, the watchful eyes of the overseer on your mita-service, and the ever-present threat of a bad omen or a false step. It's a world of total control. Logically, you would expect such a society to have vast prisons, places to hold the accused, to punish the guilty, and to sequester those who refuse to conform. We imagine grim, stone fortresses filled with criminals, a physical manifestation of the state's power to detain and punish. But the shocking reality, and one of the strangest aspects of the Inca legal system, is the almost complete absence of prisons. There were no long-term correctional facilities as we would understand them. The concept of incarcerating someone for months or years as a punishment simply did not exist. The reason for this is chillingly simple. Inca justice had no need for them. It was a system built on speed, brutality, and finality. There was no appeal. When you were accused of a crime theft, adultery, laziness, lying to a quipucamayok, the process was incredibly swift. You would be brought before the local curaca or a provincial governor. Witnesses might be heard, and evidence, such as it was, would be presented. But this was not a trial by a jury of your peers. It was an administrative hearing. The official's job was to determine guilt and assign the legally prescribed punishment. This process could take a matter of hours, or at most, a few days. There was no lengthy legal maneuvering, no drawn-out detention. Justice was immediate. The punishments were designed to be carried out on the spot, and, most importantly, in public. The goal was not rehabilitation. It was deterrence. The entire community needed to see the price of breaking the Sepa Inca's laws. A public shaming or a beating served as a lesson for everyone watching. The sentence of death was the ultimate, final solution. You might be stoned, clubbed, pushed from a cliff, or hung. Once the sentence was carried out, the case was closed. The problem was solved. The state had no interest in the long-term, costly, and inefficient process of feeding and guarding a prisoner. The dead criminal requires no resources. A shamed and beaten one is a walking advertisement for obedience. There was, however, one horrifying exception that proves the rule. It was a place that functioned as a kind of temporary holding cell and death sentence all in one. It was called the Sankahuezi, and it was lesser, prison, and more a pit of horrors. Reserved for the most heinous crimes against the state, treason, rebellion, or assassination attempts, Sankahuezi was reportedly a series of underground or semi-subterranean enclosures in Cusco. If you were accused of such a crime, you would be thrown into this pit. But you would not be alone. The pit was filled with a nightmare menagerie of venomous snakes, spiders, pumas, jaguars, and other deadly creatures. You were not being held for trial. You were being subjected to a trial by ordeal. The why of this place was a form of divine judgment. If, after 2 days, you were found alive, it was considered a sign from the gods that you were innocent. You would be brought before the Sepa Inca, pardoned, and released. But the odds of survival were, of course, almost zero. It was a death sentence disguised as a miracle. For the vast majority of people, the Sankahuezi was just a particularly gruesome and terrifying method of execution. For you, average person, this meant that life was lived on a knife's edge. There was no middle ground, no second chance in a courtroom. Your encounter with the legal system would be fast, public, and in all likelihood, painful. There was no plea bargaining, no lawyer to argue your case, no possibility of a reduced sentence. The law was a machine, and it processed your case with brutal efficiency. This system of immediate, final justice seems absolute, a world without mercy. It appears to be a closed loop of crime and punishment from which there is no escape. And yet, hidden within this ironclad system was one of the most surprising and psychologically complex laws of all, a single, remarkable loophole that offered the possibility not just of a pardon, but of a complete and total erasure of all your crimes. It was a once-in-a-lifetime confession, a final chance at redemption that reveals the deepest secrets of the Inca worldview. You are trapped. The law is an iron cage, its bars forged from the rules of labor, marriage, clothing, and travel. Justice is a predator, swift, brutal, and final. There is no escape, no appeal, no mercy. Your life is a tightrope walk over a canyon of punishment, where one misstep means a fatal plunge. The entire system is designed to be inescapable, a perfect machine of control. This is the grim and absolute world the Sepa Inca has built. The glamorous illusion, then, would be to imagine a secret escape hatch, a purely spiritual path to redemption. You picture a quiet moment with a wise priest, a sacred space where you can unburden your soul to the gods. You confess your failings, your moments of anger, your pride, your small jealousies, and in return, you receive spiritual peace, a cleansing of the soul that prepares you for the afterlife. It's a beautiful, intimate image of personal faith, a transaction that exists entirely between you, your conscience, and your gods, far from the cold reach of the state. But the shocking reality of this once-in-a-lifetime confession is that it was not primarily a spiritual transaction. It was a legal one. And it was perhaps the most psychologically cunning law in the entire empire. You did not confess to save your soul in the next life. You confessed to save your skin in this one. At some point in your life, perhaps when you fall gravely ill, or when a loved one is near death, or when the Sepa Inca himself is sick and the whole empire is in a state of spiritual crisis, you might decide the time has come. You seek out a special kind of official, a confessor priest known as an Ichuri. You meet with him in a private, secluded place, away from the prying eyes of the village. And you confess. You tell him everything. Every crime you have ever committed and gotten away with. You confess the grain you stole from the state storehouse during a lean year. You confess the lie you told the Quipucamayak about your son's age. You confess the forbidden journey you made to another village, without a permit. You confess your laziness on the Mita, the adulterous thoughts you had for your neighbor's spouse, even the flicker of resentment you felt when the Sepa Inca's litter passed by. After you have emptied your conscience of every hidden crime, the Ichuri would assign you a penance. This wasn't just a prayer. It was often a physical act. You might be told to fast for a number of days. You might be given a symbolic beating. A common ritual involved taking a bundle of straw, spitting your sins into it, and casting it into a flowing river to be washed away. Once you completed this penance, the Ichuri would grant you absolution. And this is the critical point. That absolution was not just spiritual, it was legal. You were granted a full and total pardon for every crime you had just confessed. The slate was wiped clean in the eyes of the law. You could never again be accused or punished for those specific acts. So why? Why would this totalitarian state, so obsessed with punishment, create such a stunning loophole? This is the why, the genius of the system. First, there was a catch, and it was a terrifying one. The confession was only valid if the state had not already begun an investigation into your crime. If a curaka was already asking questions about missing grain, your confession would be nothing more than an admission of guilt, and you would be punished immediately and severely. It was a desperate race between your conscience and the state's bureaucracy. Second, it was the ultimate intelligence-gathering tool. By creating a powerful incentive for people to confess their hidden crimes, the state learned an incredible amount about the stresses and strains within the empire. The confessors were essentially intelligence agents, taking the pulse of the population. They learned where dissent was simmering, which laws were most commonly broken, and what the people truly thought when they believed no one was listening. This information was vital for maintaining long-term control. Finally, and most profoundly, it was the ultimate form of psychological warfare. You had only one of these pardons to use in your entire lifetime. This forced you into a constant, agonizing calculus of risk. Do you confess the small theft you committed today? Or do you hold on to your one-time only pardon in case you commit a much greater crime like manslaughter in the future? This agonizing choice forced you to constantly police your own behavior. The fear of wasting your pardon was a more effective deterrent than the fear of the punishment itself. The state had found a way to place a warden inside your own head. The law was no longer just an external force, it was now your own internal monologue, your own conscience, turned into an agent of the state. It was the final, and perhaps most perfect, instrument of control.